Ellie Carson wasn't used to this kind of quiet. Not the peaceful kind. The expensive kind. The kind that floated in first-class cabins, where no one raised their voice and even the ice cubes in the glasses seemed to clink more politely. She sat in seat 2A, close to the window, hugging her backpack in her lap like it was a shield. Her legs dangled just slightly above the floor, something she'd never admit, but she crossed her ankles to make herself look older. Her sweater was slightly wrinkled from the Uber ride to the airport. The silver trim on her boarding pass kept catching the light, like it was trying to remind her she wasn't supposed to be here. Except she was. She had the ticket, a fully covered one, a scholarship award from a writing program she'd never applied to. Just showed up in the mail 3 weeks ago. With a simple note inside the envelope. We believe in young voices. See you in New York. No name, no explanation. Just a first-class ticket and a printed itinerary for the Young Voices Literary Summit at Columbia University. She had asked her mom if she knew anything about it, but Victoria Carson had simply smiled and said, "Maybe the world's finally catching on to how talented you are." Her mom never made a big deal about Ellie's writing, or about much, really. She was the kind of parent who listened more than she talked, who answered questions with questions, who wore crisp blouses even on weekends, and kept 3 phones she never let Ellie touch. Still, it didn't seem like her style to secretly nominate her daughter for something like this. Victoria was many things, calm, elegant, always 5 steps ahead, but pushy wasn't one of them. Ellie turned toward the window. The plane hadn't pushed back yet. Outside, the tarmac glowed in the early morning light, golden and unreal. Ground crew buzzed around like ants in high-vis vests, and somewhere far off, a plane roared down a runway. This was her first solo flight, her first time in first class, her first real step outside the life she'd always known in Savannah, Georgia. A life full of used bookstores, homemade tea, and soft-spoken people who didn't make scenes. She glanced across the aisle. A businessman was adjusting his cufflinks. The woman 2 seats down was already tapping at a MacBook, brows furrowed like the fate of the world depended on her typing speed. No one had even looked at Ellie, and yet she felt like everyone could see straight through her. Like her hoodie and jeans betrayed her, like the scuffed corners of her backpack whispered she didn't belong. She reached into the pocket of her coat and touched the ticket again, just to make sure it was still real, still hers. It was. She pulled out a small moleskin notebook and flipped it open to a blank page. She'd promised herself she would write something on this flight, something honest. But the only thing that filled her head now was a tight knot of nerves and the quiet hum of the cabin. Ellie took a deep breath. She wasn't scared, not exactly, just alert. Like some part of her was waiting for something to go wrong. Then a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me," said a woman's voice, slightly too sharp for this calm cabin. "Are you in the right seat?" Ellie looked up. A flight attendant in her 40s stood beside her, her name tag gleaming. Nadine. Ellie blinked. "Yes. I think so." Nadine tilted her head, one perfectly arched eyebrow. "You think so?" Ellie fumbled for the boarding pass and held it out. "Seat 2A. Nadine glanced at it for barely a second, then back at Ellie. "This is a first-class cabin." "I know," Ellie said quietly. The attendant didn't move. Her gaze traveled down Ellie's outfit, her frayed backpack, her unstyled hair. Then she smiled, but it wasn't kind. It was the kind of smile people gave when they were waiting for you to trip so they could act surprised. "I'll just double-check something with the gate," Nadine said, her voice light but edged. And just like that, she turned and walked briskly up the aisle. Ellie stared after her. A few passengers had started to glance her way now, not overtly, just quick flickers. A businessman shifted uncomfortably. The woman with the laptop raised an eyebrow. One man pretended to reach for his newspaper, but paused too long in her direction. Ellie felt it again, that deep, unmistakable feeling. Like her existence was being put on trial, and she didn't even know the charges yet. She sat back slowly in her seat, spine straight, shoulders tight. She didn't say a word, didn't argue. She didn't move. But inside, 1,000 questions were starting to wake up, and not one of them had an answer yet. It wasn't the words that stung first. It was the way Nadine said them. Loud enough for people nearby to hear, soft enough to pretend it was private. The flight attendant had returned, holding what looked like a small tablet in one hand. She stood just to the side of Ellie's seat, blocking the aisle with casual authority. "I spoke with the gate staff," she said, voice crisp, "and there's no record of a minor being booked into first class on this flight." Ellie blinked. "But I have the ticket, Nadine raised a hand, gently, cutting her off without touching her. "I'm sure you believe you do, sweetheart. But sometimes there are mistakes. I just need to verify how you got this seat." Across the aisle, someone rustled a newspaper. Another passenger leaned forward slightly, clearly trying to catch what was being said. Ellie could feel the heat crawling up her neck. She opened her mouth, closed it. "I was invited to a writing summit in New York," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The ticket was mailed to me." Nadine's smile tightened. "How convenient." Ellie sat up straighter. "It was part of a scholarship. Do you have any documentation?" "No." "Just the ticket?" "Mm-hmm." Nadine nodded, not writing anything down. "And do you often travel in first class alone?" "I've never flown before." Nadine tilted her head, like she'd just confirmed a theory. "Exactly," she said. The word hung there. Exactly. As if the very idea of a girl like Ellie, young, soft-spoken, plainly dressed, daring to sit in 2A was already a kind of offense. "I'm going to have you step aside for a quick verification process," Nadine added, already motioning to someone in the galley. Ellie's heart thudded in her chest. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said, quieter this time. Nadine smiled again, that same customer service smile with no warmth behind it. "I didn't say you did, but you're treating me like I did." A beat passed. Then Nadine stepped closer, voice low and pointed. "You may not realize this, honey, but first class is a little different. It's reserved for certain guests, frequent flyers, corporate accounts, adults." Ellie's throat tightened. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," she whispered. Nadine straightened. "Then let's keep things calm, shall we?" A second flight attendant appeared, this one younger, dark-haired, glancing between them with confusion. Nadine handed her the tablet and said, "Please accompany her to the front, quietly." Passengers were watching now. Not openly, just in the way eyes flicked and then darted away. In the silence that spread down the cabin like spilled water. Ellie didn't move. Her fingers gripped the strap of her backpack so tightly her knuckles whitened. She had done everything right. Checked in early, followed instructions, kept to herself, smiled, said please and thank you, wore the sweater her mom said made her look mature but approachable. And still, somehow, she was the problem. She stood slowly, shoulders tense, eyes fixed on the carpeted aisle as she followed the second attendant forward, heart pounding in her ears. The curtain at the front of first class rustled shut behind her. In the galley, it was colder. The hum of the plane's systems was louder here, metallic and impersonal. The younger attendant tried to look kind, but her eyes flicked toward the tablet like it held something more important than Ellie herself. "I just need to check something," she said, tapping. "Can I see your boarding pass again?" Ellie handed it over without a word. The woman scanned it, blinked. "It says 2A, it's valid." She looked up. But before Ellie could breathe relief, a voice cut in from the side. "She doesn't belong there." It was Nadine again, appearing like she'd never left. "I don't care what the scan says. There must have been a booking error. No one in our manifest matches that name in that seat." The younger attendant hesitated. Ellie's voice was soft but clear. "Why are you doing this?" Nadine's eyes narrowed. "I'm doing my job." "No," Ellie said. "You're assuming. You saw me, and you assumed I didn't belong." The galley went quiet. Even the metal trays seemed to hold their breath. Then, a deeper voice entered the space. "Is there a problem here?" A man in pilot's stripes stepped in. Captain Harland, Ellie caught from his name tag. Older, composed, with a presence that made everyone shift subtly straighter. Ellie stayed quiet. Nadine answered too quickly. "Just verifying a seating issue." Captain Harland's gaze moved to Ellie, then to the boarding pass still in the younger attendant's hand. He looked back at Nadine. "2A is valid. We're not delaying the flight for appearances." Nadine opened her mouth, but he cut her off. "We don't remove passengers without cause, and we certainly don't profile based on optics." Nadine's cheeks flushed. Captain Harland turned to Ellie. "Go ahead and return to your seat, Miss Carson." Ellie nodded silently, clutching her backpack to her chest. She walked back down the aisle. No one met her eyes, but this time, she didn't look away. Ellie returned to seat 2A with her spine straight and her eyes forward. She didn't look left, didn't glance right. She simply slid into her seat, buckled in, and folded her hands over her backpack again, like nothing had happened. But something had. The man across the aisle coughed and quickly looked away. The woman with the laptop typed. Slower now, her fingers faltering like her thoughts had drifted. Nadine didn't walk past again. Not yet. For the first time since Ellie had boarded the flight, the cabin felt tense. Not the kind of tension you could name, but the kind you could feel. The kind that made air feel thicker. Ellie stared out the window. She didn't cry. She didn't blink. She simply breathed. And in that breath, she felt something shift inside her. Not anger, not even embarrassment. Something deeper. Something older. She'd been through things like this before. Smaller, subtler. Teachers calling on the real writer in the group project. Store clerks double-checking her mom's credit card. The unspoken rule that girls like her had to explain how they got into places where they didn't look like they belonged. But never like this. Never this public, never this sharp. She gripped the edge of her tray table, knuckles pale, and thought, "Don't give them a reaction. Don't give them a show." Silence had power. Her mother had taught her that. Victoria Carson didn't raise her voice when people underestimated her. She didn't argue when board members questioned her decisions. She simply did what she came to do. And by the time anyone realized, she was already 5 moves ahead. Ellie closed her eyes briefly and imagined her mom in one of those corporate meetings she sometimes mentioned. Calm, collected, saying less and meaning more. She'd once told Ellie, "Let them underestimate you. It's easier to rewrite the ending when no one sees you coming." The plane began taxiing. Seatbelts clicked. Engines hummed louder. But Ellie didn't move. Then, a soft voice. "Miss Carson?" She looked up. It wasn't Nadine. It was the younger flight attendant from the galley. Jamie, her name tag read. She was holding a glass of water and a small card. "I wanted to apologize," Jamie said quietly, crouching beside Ellie's seat. "I saw how that was handled. It wasn't right." Ellie said nothing. Jamie placed the water on the tray table and slid the card next to it. "If you need anything at all, just press the call button. And, for what it's worth, I'm glad you're here." Then she stood and walked away. Ellie stared at the card. It wasn't a menu or a safety reminder. It was handwritten. "You did nothing wrong. Some of us see you. Jay." Ellie felt her throat tighten. She tucked the card into her notebook without a word. The flight lifted off, smooth and uneventful. But inside, Ellie's mind was a storm. She didn't want to tell her mom. Not yet. Not while she was still in the air. Not while she was still figuring out how to explain that being visible could feel like a threat. She thought of the other passengers. Their silence had screamed. No one had said a word. No one had stood up. But maybe that was why she had to. Not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. She reached for her notebook again. This time, she began to write. "They looked at me like I was an error, but I wasn't the one who didn't belong. I was just the only one they hadn't expected." She didn't know if the words were for a story or a poem or just for herself. But they felt like a beginning. Midway through the flight, Nadine returned. Her face was neutral, lips pursed. She leaned in slightly. "I trust everything's in order now," she said, like she was offering peace. Ellie looked at her, eyes calm. "Yes," she said. "Everything's exactly where it's supposed to be." Nadine didn't respond. She moved on down the aisle. But for the first time, Ellie saw something in her posture, and that meant more than an apology ever could. As the plane soared above the clouds, Ellie sat quietly in her seat, the hum of the engines matching the slow, steady beat of her heart. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't begged for permission. She'd held her seat, and the world had shifted around her. The seatbelt light had gone off 20 minutes earlier, but Ellie hadn't moved. She sat still in seat 2A, legs tucked slightly to the side, notebook open on her lap. The words she'd written earlier, half poem, half journal, looked foreign now, like they belonged to someone braver than her, someone bolder, someone who hadn't almost cried in an airplane galley while trying to explain she had a right to sit in a seat she'd already paid for, or at least been given. She looked out the window, but the clouds below didn't help. They were too still, too untouched by what had just happened in the cabin. Everyone else had returned to normal, movies playing, drinks clinking softly, keyboards clicking, but her skin still buzzed. Then, a voice cut through her thoughts, calm, precise, just above a whisper. "Excuse me, are you Victoria Carson's daughter?" Ellie's head turned. The woman across the aisle, mid-60s, elegant, with silver-streaked hair pulled back into a low bun, was leaning slightly toward her, eyes kind but sharp. She wore a navy scarf, neatly folded, and a simple gold pin on her lapel. Her voice was clear and polite, and it didn't sound like a stranger's voice. Ellie hesitated. Yes, that's my mom." The woman smiled faintly. "I thought so." There was a pause. Ellie wasn't sure if she should say more, so she didn't. She just waited. The woman leaned back slightly and looked out her own window, then back at Ellie. "I knew your mother," she said. "A long time ago, before the world knew who she really was." Ellie's heart skipped. "You worked with her?" she asked. The woman nodded. "At the Chronicle, before she bought it outright." "Bought it?" Ellie blinked. Her mom ran the Morning Ledger. Everyone knew that. But owned it? "I didn't know she..." Ellie started. "She didn't tell you?" The woman raised an eyebrow. Of course she didn't. That's just like her. The woman reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather-bound planner, flipping it open to a page with neat handwriting. She tore a piece of paper from it and folded it twice before sliding it across the aisle on the tray divider between them. If anything else happens before landing, the woman said quietly, use this number. Don't hesitate. The person who answers will know exactly what to do. Ellie stared at the folded slip. I don't understand, she said slowly. Why would I need a number? The woman's voice lowered even more. Because some people don't like being reminded that they can't always control who sits where. A pause. Then she added, and your mother isn't just a newspaper woman, she's a force. There are people who owe her more than they'll ever admit, myself included. Ellie swallowed hard. So, what just happened with the flight attendant? An incident, the woman said simply. The kind that tends to disappear quietly, unless the wrong person notices, or the right person refuses to let it go. Ellie tucked the slip of paper into her notebook. For the first time since boarding, she felt like the story she was in, her story, was connected to something far bigger. Like she'd just found a thread and started pulling, only to realize it led to an entire fabric of people, silence, and power she'd never been told about. She sat back in her seat. The hum of the plane didn't feel quite so loud anymore. Across the aisle, the woman gave her one last glance. And Ellie? Yes? You didn't imagine what happened earlier. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Half an hour later, Nadine passed by again. She didn't stop this time, didn't glance Ellie's way, but her posture was different, tight, less confident, almost watchful. Ellie looked straight ahead. She didn't need revenge, didn't want to create a scene. She just needed to remember who she was and who raised her. She picked up her pen and wrote a new line in her notebook. They saw me alone, but I wasn't, not really. The seatbelt sign dinged on again. We're starting our initial descent, the captain's voice said over the intercom, smooth and neutral. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for arrival. Ellie glanced out the window. Below the clouds, New York City stretched in the distance. Grids of light and shadow, a patchwork of lives in motion. She had always imagined her first time arriving in the city would be electric, exciting, something out of a movie. Instead, her stomach was a slow knot, coiled tight. A gentle knock at her shoulder made her jump slightly. It was Jamie again, the kind flight attendant from earlier. Hey, she said softly, crouching beside Ellie's seat like before. When we land, just keep your head up, all right? Ellie nodded. Thanks, I'm okay. Jamie hesitated. You might get stopped at the gate. Sometimes these things escalate off the plane. Ellie's brow furrowed. Escalate? Jamie nodded subtly. When it gets filed as a security irregularity, the airline has to follow through. Sometimes they try to cover themselves by making you look suspicious. Ellie's chest tightened. But I didn't do anything. I know, Jamie said. And so does Captain Harlan. He called someone before we even passed 10,000 feet. Ellie blinked. Called who? Jamie gave a small, unreadable smile. You'll see. And with that, she walked off, blending back into the cabin routine like she'd never said a word. 20 minutes later, the wheels touched down with a smooth bounce. Passengers stirred, stretching arms, unbuckling belts, too early, reaching for bags. The plane slowly taxied to the gate and Ellie's hands remained tight on her backpack. The woman across the aisle, the one who knew her mother, gave her a slight nod, then retrieved her small carry-on and disappeared down the jet bridge like any other passenger. Ellie waited, So did Jamie. The cabin slowly emptied. Then came the voice over the PA. "Miss Ellie Carson, please remain seated. A representative is boarding to speak with you." Whispers flicked through the cabin. The last businessman stepped off. Nadine stood at the front, posture rigid. And then, a new figure appeared at the aircraft door. A woman in her early 40s, sharp navy pantsuit, leather portfolio tucked neatly under one arm. She stepped into the cabin like it belonged to her. Her voice was even. "Ms. Carson?" Ellie stood, unsure whether to speak. "I'm Maya Sloan," the woman said. "Vice President of Passenger Relations, Jetline Air." She offered a card embossed with gold. "I'm here on behalf of Ms. Victoria Carson." Ellie blinked. Maya nodded. "She's on the ground, and she made one phone call." Ellie took the card. Her hands were shaking now, not from fear but from something else. Relief, maybe. Recognition. "I'd like to escort you, personally, to the terminal," Maya continued. "If you're comfortable with that." Ellie nodded. As they walked down the jet bridge, Nadine tried to follow, but Maya turned smoothly, voice clipped. "That won't be necessary. You'll be contacted by HR." Nadine froze. The words landed heavy. HR? Passengers waiting in the terminal glanced up as Ellie stepped into the gate area beside the corporate officer. Phones were lifted. Someone whispered her name. And then, to Ellie's astonishment, a woman in an airport blazer handed her a printed folder. Inside, a formal written apology from Jetline Air. Signed. Stamped. Sealed. 10 minutes later, Ellie was in a private lounge she hadn't even known existed. The lights were soft, the chairs too nice. Water was brought on a tray, poured from glass bottles. Her mom was on the line. "Hi, baby," Victoria's voice said. Calm, strong, but underneath, there was an edge Ellie hadn't heard before. "Hi," Ellie whispered. "Did you?" "I got the alert when the incident was logged mid-air," her mother said. "I called Maya. She owed me a favor." "A favor?" Ellie asked. "You don't even like to ask people for help." Victoria's tone softened. "I don't. But I also don't tolerate people putting my daughter on trial at 30,000 feet." There was a beat of silence. Then Ellie asked quietly, "Why didn't you tell me you were important?" Her mother sighed. "Because I wanted you to grow into your own name first," she said. "Not mine." Ellie's throat caught, and for the first time in hours, the tension in her shoulders broke. Not because someone had fixed it, but because someone, finally, had seen it. Ellie sat quietly in the back seat of the car, the city lights of Manhattan flickering past her window like sparks from a long, slow burn. The private airport lounge had emptied out long ago. Her mom's voice still lingered in her ears, not from the phone call earlier, but from before. From years of memories. The way Victoria Carson always told her to listen more than she spoke, to read every document twice, and to never let someone else's discomfort make you smaller. For the first time, those lessons weren't just about school or friendships. They were armor. Jamie had slipped her a note before she left the airport. They'll try to minimize it, stay bigger than they expect. So far, she had. But part of her still didn't know what to do with what had happened. It wasn't just about a seat on a plane anymore. By morning, her name had already started to surface, quietly at first. A blurry photo of her standing beside Maya Sloan at the gate had appeared on a local news blog. The caption simply read, "Jetline under fire after teen with valid first-class ticket publicly confronted." The article was brief, speculative, and technically anonymous, but the comments told the real story. "I was on that flight. She never raised her voice. The flight attendant was completely out of line. This reminds me of what happened to my daughter at college orientation last year. Same look, same assumptions. Victoria Carson's kid, now it makes sense. They messed with the wrong family. Ellie scrolled through the thread with a strange mixture of pride and disorientation. She hadn't planned this. She hadn't asked for any of it. But now that it had begun, she couldn't look away from it either. Later that afternoon, while waiting at her mom's office on the 34th floor of the Morning Ledger building, Ellie wandered into a corner of the executive library. A wall of framed articles caught her eye. Her mother had never talked about them. But there they were. Award-winning investigations, exposed fraud, wrongful convictions overturned, hidden political donors named, and right in the center, a photo of Victoria herself. Not in a power suit, not in a press conference, but in jeans and a windbreaker, notebook in one hand, standing outside a protest barricade in Chicago, face calm, eyes razor sharp. The caption read, "The truth has hands and sometimes they're quiet ones." Ellie stared at that photo for a long time, because for the first time in her life, she didn't just admire her mother, understood her. That night, Victoria sat across from her at the dining table. No staff, no noise, just the two of them and 2 mugs of black tea. "Did I embarrass you?" her mom asked. Ellie looked up. "When?" "At the airport. Sending someone to get you. Pulling rank." "No," Ellie said. "You scared me, but not because of that." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "I realized," Ellie continued, "that I didn't really know how powerful you are." Her mom didn't say anything at first. Then she exhaled. "I didn't want you to lead with power," Victoria said. "I wanted you to lead with self." Ellie nodded slowly. "But there's danger in silence too, right?" For a pause. "Yes," Victoria said. "Silence is a tool. But if you never speak, they'll pretend you were never there to begin with." Ellie felt that line settle in her chest like a stone. By the weekend, Nadine was on administrative leave. The airline had issued a formal apology and statement of values online, full of corporate safe language. Deeply regret, unfortunate misunderstanding, commitment to inclusion. But what caught attention wasn't the apology. It was the leaked internal memo, posted anonymously, that showed Nadine had previously been warned for patterned over-escalation with passengers of color, or from non-traditional profiles. The media had its headline, but Ellie had something deeper. She had clarity. She wasn't just the girl in seat 2A anymore. She was the girl they tried to erase. The girl who didn't yell, didn't push, didn't threaten. Just stood her ground and watched them reveal themselves. The final moment came, quietly. A letter arrived. No stamp. No return address. Inside was a short note on thick cream paper. "Your silence spoke louder than their accusations. Keep speaking like that. A friend of your mother's." Ellie folded it once, tucked it into the back of her notebook, and stared out the window of her room. The skyline was lit like a story waiting to be told. She was ready, not just to tell it, but to own it. Sunday morning was unusually quiet in the Carson apartment. No emails, no calls, just the low hum of the city far below and the soft clink of dishes in the kitchen as Ellie made herself tea, the way her mom always did. Loose leaves, not bagged. 2 cubes of sugar, not 1. She moved slowly, deliberately, not out of tiredness, but something heavier. Reflection. The news cycle had started to shift. A new political scandal had pushed Jetline's apology lower down the page, but the video from the gate, the one someone had quietly recorded of Ellie standing beside the VP of Passenger Relations, had quietly gone viral. Not because it was dramatic, because it was quiet. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't cried. She had just stood there, surrounded by suits and security and silence. And the world had filled in the rest. That afternoon, she opened the box. It had been tucked in the back of her mom's office closet, marked only with a sticky note. Ellie, when you're ready. She wasn't sure she was ready, but she opened it anyway. Inside were things she recognized and things she didn't. A photo of her mom at age 23, standing in front of the Ledger's original building in Chicago, hair blown wild by the wind. A set of old journalist credentials from when Victoria still carried a press badge. A worn leather notebook. A rolled blueprint with the Jetline logo faintly watermarked across it. Ellie unrolled the blueprint slowly. It wasn't architectural. It was a schematic, technical, something about the altimeter system used in Jetline's earlier aircraft. She didn't fully understand it, but someone had written notes in red pen all along the side. Fault margin beyond FAA range, reported twice, suppressed. Her breath caught. She recognized the handwriting, her mother's. Later that night, she brought the folder to Victoria's office and laid it gently on the table between them. "I think you meant for me to find this," Ellie said. Victoria didn't answer immediately. She looked down at the schematic, then back at her daughter, her expression unreadable. "I filed that report 19 years ago," she said quietly. 2 months before I left my post at the Ledger. I couldn't prove the suppression, only the fault. The editor wouldn't run it. "Well, not?" Ellie asked, even though she already knew. "Jetline was one of our biggest advertisers," Victoria said. "It was an election year. No one wanted a scandal." Ellie nodded slowly. "I didn't tell you about it," her mother added, "because I didn't want you growing up thinking truth only works if it's convenient." Another pause. "I wanted you to believe it worked because it was true." Ellie let those words settle. Then she said, "Well, it turns out truth has a funny way of resurfacing." Her mom smiled, small but real. "And you didn't even have to yell." The next day, Ellie found herself in a boardroom she never expected to sit in. Maya Sloan had invited her for a follow-up conversation. Not damage control, clarification. "This isn't an investigation," Maya had said. "It's a conversation between people who care what happens next." Ellie sat at the long glass table, notebook in hand, the same one she'd carried on the flight. Across from her, 2 Jetline executives, a compliance officer, and a new face, a man from an independent watchdog group. "We want to talk about what went wrong," the compliance officer said, "and more importantly, how we document and prevent it going forward." Ellie took a breath. Then she said clearly, "You need to stop assuming that people who look like me don't belong in row 2A. Silence. She let it hang, then added, "And you need to stop rewarding staff for gut instinct, when that instinct only ever targets the same kinds of passengers." The watchdog nodded. "Well said." The compliance officer took notes. The executive said little, but Ellie didn't care. She wasn't here to be liked. She was here to be heard. After the meeting, Maya pulled her aside in the hallway. "You've got something rare," she said. "A calm most people don't develop until their 40s. "I don't feel calm," Ellie replied. "That's the trick," Maya said. "The world doesn't know the difference." They both smiled. Then Maya leaned in slightly. "Your mom ever tell you how she got her first big story?" Ellie shook her head. "She didn't pitch it," Maya said. "She became it." That night, Ellie stood at her bedroom window, the city glowing below her like something ancient and alive. She held the schematic in one hand, her notebook in the other. 2 legacies. One written, one lived, and she was starting to understand. She wasn't just carrying her mother's name. She was extending it, turning silence into structure, turning doubt into definition, turning a single flight into something they couldn't file away. And she wasn't done yet. Not even close. It wasn't supposed to go public. That was the part that stunned Ellie the most. The meeting with Jetline had ended with polite words, vague promises, and a thin layer of corporate varnish. But no press, no statement, just silence. Until Monday morning. The article dropped at 6:02 a.m. Eastern. Teen passenger confronted in first class. Jetline faces questions of profiling, power, and accountability. Byline: Jonas Feldman. Ellie's eyes widened when she saw the name. She hadn't seen Jonas since the day at the gate, just a brief introduction in the hallway, a quiet nod of thanks. He was a longtime aviation reporter, her mother had once said. Quiet, thorough, dangerous if you had something to hide. Now, he had written her story. Except, it didn't feel like a takedown. It felt like a mirror. The first paragraph wasn't about her boarding the plane or Nadine's accusation. It was about a question. Who gets to decide who belongs in first class? And why are we still asking that in 2025? From there, it unraveled, gently but surgically. Her scholarship, the valid ticket, the public confrontation, the silent fallout. He had facts, quotes, timelines. But he also had something Ellie hadn't expected. Demeanor type. It wasn't a story about a girl who stood up. It was about a system that tried to sit her down. By 8 a.m., the article had been shared nearly 30,000 times. By 9:15, Maya Sloan texted, "Wasn't us, but it's out now. Lean in, not back." By 10 o'clock, Victoria Carson walked into Ellie's room holding 2 coffees and the Sunday print edition, Jonas's article now front page above the fold. Her mother said nothing. She just handed Ellie the cup and sat beside her on the bed. "Did you know he was writing it?" Ellie asked. Victoria shook her head. "But I knew it was coming. Jonas doesn't let these things go." They sat in silence. Ellie finally asked, "Was it fair?" Her mother looked over. "Yes, and that's why it'll make them sweat." At school the next day, no one said anything at first. A few glances in the hallway. Teacher paused mid-lecture when she saw Ellie enter the room, eyes softening just slightly. By lunch, things changed. Someone left a sticky note on her locker. "You didn't yell." That's how I knew it was real. A boy from sophomore English, usually too cool to say anything, nodded at her and mumbled, "Read the article." It hit. But it wasn't the recognition that struck her most. It was the emails. They started pouring in that evening. Not from classmates, from strangers. Women, mothers, former flight attendants, a retired judge. Each one different, but they all said some version of the same thing. "Thank you for staying calm. My daughter had a similar experience. You reminded me why we still have to speak up, even when we're tired. I left a job like that. I never told anyone. Thank you for making me feel seen." 3 days later, Ellie walked into the newsroom of the Morning Ledger for the first time, not as someone's daughter, but as the reason the receptionist smiled and said, "They're expecting you." Upstairs, Jonas stood beside Victoria's desk, holding a plain envelope. "You earned this," he said, handing it to Ellie. Inside, a printed copy of the full article, signed in black ink at the bottom. To Ellie. "The story belonged to you, I just listened," Jenna said. Ellie swallowed hard. She had spent most of her life trying not to be the center of attention. Now she realized it wasn't about being the center. It was about being the one who doesn't disappear. That evening, Victoria finally told her the full story. About the early days at the Ledger. The stories she fought to get printed. The fights she lost. The editor who once told her, "A woman with your last name should know better than to stir up liability." And how, one night, after yet another story had been pulled for sensitivity, she came home and promised herself something. "If they ever come for you," she told Ellie, "I won't be quiet, even if it costs me everything." Ellie looked over. "But you didn't have to say anything this time." Her mother smiled faintly. "Because you already knew how." The article changed things. Not overnight, but noticeably. Jetline updated its official boarding procedures. Flight attendants were given new training. Maya Sloan quietly replaced 2 senior staff members. And Ellie, she didn't go viral. She didn't do interviews. But every now and then, she'd get another email from someone who had stayed quiet once and didn't want to anymore. And that, she realized, was the point. Not fame, not applause, making space for someone else to say. Happened to me too. The school assembly had never been more crowded. What was usually a sleepy Wednesday morning ritual, bad lighting, squeaky chairs, a principal who droned about parking lot safety, had become something else entirely. They were calling it a community recognition event, but everyone knew why they were really there. Ellie Carson had been asked to speak. It wasn't the school's idea at first. It had been a student petition, signed by nearly 400 names in 48 hours. Teachers, parents, alumni, even the local superintendent had taken notice. So now here she was, backstage, palms damp, heart steady, waiting. From behind the curtain, Ellie could hear the principal fumbling through the introduction. Something about civic courage, 21st century character, and rising above adversity. She barely listened, because across the stage, her eyes had locked on a figure standing in the wings. Her mother, Victoria, stood near the edge of the auditorium wall, arms folded, just watching, not smiling, not crying, just there, her presence. And suddenly, Ellie wasn't nervous anymore. She stepped onto the stage, and the room went still. She didn't read from a paper, didn't hold a mic like a rock star. She just spoke, calmly, clearly, the way her mother taught her. "A few weeks ago, I boarded a plane to New York with a valid ticket and a head full of music. I thought that was all I needed. But for 6 minutes, someone decided I didn't belong. Not because of a policy, not because of a safety issue, but because of how I looked, how I dressed, how young I seemed, and because I didn't match someone's idea of what first class looks like." She let the pause stretch, like her mom had told her. Let the words settle. "I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene, but I also didn't move. And because I stayed still, someone had to confront what they assumed was true. And that made all the difference." From the back row, a teacher who had never once spoken to Ellie was now blinking back tears. A girl from the freshman class leaned forward, whispering, "She's talking about me, isn't she?" In the third row, someone hit record on their phone without realizing they were crying too. And Ellie kept going. "I didn't tell this story for attention. I told it because silence is how we disappear. And I'm tired of disappearing." Applause didn't erupt. Not at first, because no one wanted to break the spell. But when it finally came, it was real, from the gut, and it rolled through the room like thunder. Ellie gave a small nod and stepped off the stage. Backstage, her mom waited. "Not bad," Victoria said. Ellie raised an eyebrow. "Just not bad?" Her mom smiled. Fine, you were exceptional. They shared a quiet hug, the kind you don't photograph, the kind you feel in your bones. By that evening, the video from the assembly had reached more people than the article ever had. Clips of her speech flooded social media. But it wasn't the words people quoted. It was the moment Ellie stood at the mic, shoulders back, voice even, refusing to be rattled. She didn't flinch. This is what strength looks like without shouting. She's 17, and she just taught my entire office how to be brave. News outlets called, daytime shows emailed, advocacy groups asked for interviews. Ellie declined almost all of them. She wasn't looking to be a celebrity. She was building something slower, something that would last. The next day, a small envelope arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single note, typed on old stationery. They watched you stand, and this time, they couldn't look away. A friend of Evelyn's, her grandmother, the one Victoria had only recently begun to speak about again, the one who had fought her own quiet wars decades ago, and lost more than Ellie would ever understand. Ellie folded the note and placed it inside her notebook, not as a souvenir, but as a reminder that legacies don't whisper forever. Eventually they rise. The day after the assembly, Ellie took the long way home from school. She didn't tell anyone, didn't text her mom, didn't ask for a ride. She just walked. Past the deli with the old neon sign, past the bookstore where she bought her first notebook, past the crosswalk where she once froze from stage fright during a 6th grade field trip and had to be led across by a teacher holding her hand. Back then, her fear had been of being seen. Now, her fear was different. It was of what would happen after people saw her. She reached the brownstone just as the sun dipped below the roof lines. The world outside was still, soaked in the soft kind of gold that made the air feel sacred. Her mom wasn't home. Two-step note on the counter. Late meeting, food in the fridge. Proud of you always. Ellie warmed the leftover pasta but barely touched it. Instead, she sat at the dining table with her mother's old leather notebook, the one she had found buried in the office closet. She flipped to a page she hadn't noticed before. Tucked between meeting notes and interview sketches was a phrase written in her mom's sharp, looping script. Silence is powerful when it's a choice, dangerous when it's expected. Ellie read it again, then closed the book. Later that night, her phone buzzed with a new notification. Not an article, not a repost, a message from someone named A. Nadine. The subject line, "Before you judge me." Ellie hesitated. She didn't want to click it, didn't want to give that name the time of day, but curiosity, or maybe clarity, made her open it anyway. Ellie, you don't have to read this, but I'm writing it because I need to say something. I wasn't trying to humiliate you. I've been in this job for 11 years, and somewhere along the way, my instincts stopped being about safety and started being about patterns, about assumptions. I looked at you and I didn't see a scholarship student or a passenger. I saw a problem. That's on me. I don't expect forgiveness. But I do want you to know, since the incident, I've started retraining. Voluntarily. Not just the airline's version, but with people who challenge my worldview. You forced me to look at myself. That's not your job. But you did it anyway. And I'm sorry. Nadim. Ellie sat still for a long time. She didn't know what she expected. A threat? A denial? An attempt to shift blame? But not a woman trying to unlearn what no one had ever forced her to examine. Ellie didn't reply, not because she wasn't moved, but because silence, this time, was her choice. 3 days later, she got a call from Maya Sloan. "Are you sitting down?" Maya asked. "I'm lying on the floor," Ellie replied. Which was true. She was doing math homework on the carpet with her laptop open beside her. Maya chuckled. "Well, good. Because Jetline's board is issuing a new internal policy. Public seating profiles will now go through blind confirmation, names and photos redacted from initial checks." Ellie blinked. "You mean?" "I mean the gate agents won't see your face until after your boarding pass is cleared." Ellie sat up. "Wait, that's because of me?" "It's because of your stillness," Maya corrected, "and what it forced us to reckon with." There was a pause. "Also," Maya added, "you're being invited to speak at the annual Equity in Aviation conference in October. They want to hear from you, not your mom." Ellie laughed, nervous but real. She wasn't used to being asked, not like this. "I don't even know what I'd say," she admitted. "You'll figure it out," Maya said. "You already have." That night, Ellie walked onto the apartment's tiny balcony. The city buzzed below, distant and harmless, a siren in the distance, a horn, someone laughing 3 floors down. And through all of it, her mind was still, not quiet like retreat, quiet like steel. She took out her phone and opened her notes app. She typed slowly, carefully, with 2 thumbs and no edits. They said I didn't look the part, but maybe that was the part worth changing. Ellie Carson. Then she saved it. Not to post, just to remember, because the world had finally heard her voice. But it was her silence that echoed. Ellie stood in front of the mirror, pinning back the last strand of hair that kept falling over her right eye. It was the 3rd time she'd tried. Her hands weren't shaking, not quite, but they definitely weren't steady. She checked the time, 9:42 IEM. 18 minutes until she stepped on stage at the Equity in Aviation conference. She looked down at the name badge clipped to her blazer. Ellie Carson, keynote speaker. Underneath it, in smaller letters, visibility, voice, and value. The irony of that last word, value, was not lost on her. 3 months ago, a woman like Nadine had looked her over and assigned her value without asking a single question. And now, that same industry had flown her in, comped her hotel, and handed her a microphone. She didn't know if that meant progress or PR, but she did know this: she was ready. Backstage, she found Maya Sloan waiting near the AV table. Maya gave her a quiet nod. "You've got 10 minutes, she said. "But honestly, say what you need to say. If it runs a little over, they'll survive." Ellie smiled, grateful for Maya's calm. "How many people out there?" she asked. "About 200 in the room," Maya said. "Probably 5 times that watching online." Ellie took a slow breath. "Great." "And Ellie," Maya added, lowering her voice, "don't forget, you're not just speaking to them. You're speaking for a lot of people who never got the mic that landed hard." Ellie nodded, then stepped toward the curtain. The auditorium lights were warm, but not blinding. The rows stretched farther back than she expected. Executives in navy suits, pilots in uniform, a few young faces sprinkled among the gray-haired ones. Somewhere in the front row, she saw Victoria, her mother, sitting with folded arms and eyes locked forward, completely still, just like Ellie had learned to be. She stepped up to the podium, adjusted the mic, and began. "Good morning. My name is Ellie Carson. A few months ago, I boarded a flight with a valid ticket, a dream in my pocket, and no idea I was walking into a story that didn't start with me, but somehow had been waiting for me all along." The room was so quiet she could hear the slight buzz of someone's phone on vibrate in the fourth row. Someone looked at me that day and decided I didn't belong. Not because of a policy, not because of data, but because of what they assumed when they saw a teenage girl in worn jeans traveling alone in first class. She paused, her breath steady. It wasn't the confrontation that stuck with me. It was how fast other people looked away. People saw what happened, but no one said anything, not right away. And in that silence, I started to understand something. Belonging isn't about permission. It's about presence. Murmurs rippled quietly through the crowd, heads nodded. My mother was a journalist. A long time ago, she tried to write about a safety issue involving this very industry. She was told to be careful, that the truth might cost her more than it was worth. So she filed the report, then quietly stepped away. She glanced at her mother. Victoria didn't move, but Ellie could see it in her eyes. Pride and pain. Amy told her to stay quiet, and she did. For me. But what no one realized is that silence doesn't erase legacy. It just delays it. That folder. The one she left behind in a closet, full of notes and names and codes. It found its way back into the light, through me. She let that sit for a second, then drew in a slow breath. You don't need to be loud to make change. You need to be seen, and then you need to stay. A woman in the second row dabbed at her eyes. Someone in the back stood up, maybe out of respect, maybe just a stretch, but it didn't matter. Ellie was holding the room. Today, I'm not here to shame this industry. I'm here because I still believe in it. In the engineers who stay up all night running diagnostics. In the pilots who double-check everything, even when they're exhausted. In the gate agents who smile at the grandmother boarding alone. In the interns, the mechanics, the attendants who treat people with humanity instead of suspicion. She leaned slightly forward, but belief isn't loyalty. Belief requires accountability. And if my mother's truth was inconvenient, then mine is overdue. Silence. Then a single clap. Then two. Then the whole room. Ellie gave the smallest of nods and stepped back. She didn't wait for applause to die down. She didn't need to. Her voice had landed, and that was enough. Backstage, Maya hugged her. You just rewrote the playbook, she whispered. Ellie pulled back, exhaling. Feels like I borrowed my mom's voice for 15 minutes. No, Maya said. You found your own. It just sounds a little like hers. Later that afternoon, Ellie and Victoria sat in a quiet cafe off Lexington. 2 cappuccinos, 1 slice of pie. No fanfare, just them. Victoria sipped her drink, then set it down. You said everything I couldn't, she said softly. Ellie looked at her. You wrote it first. Victoria nodded. But I buried it. You brought it back. A long silence. Then Ellie said something she'd been holding on to for weeks. Do you think they'll come after me? She asked. Her mother smiled faintly. Not if they're smart. But if they do, you'll be ready. Elliot nodded. She didn't feel invincible, but she felt equipped. And maybe that was better. That night, alone in her hotel room, Ellie opened the window. The city glowed below her. Lights, horns, steam rising from grates. She held her mother's old notebook in one hand, her own in the other. 2 stories, 1 lineage, and 1 voice. Clear, steady, hers. Ellie was never one for sunrises. She preferred late nights, soft shadows, the quiet that came when the world finally stopped asking questions. But that morning, she was up before 5 a.m., sitting cross-legged on her mother's small apartment balcony, a blanket around her shoulders and a mug of half-warm tea in her hands. The sky was still dark, but she could feel the change coming, the kind of hush that settles right before the light arrives. Everything had changed, and yet, everything felt familiar. Across the city, a news van was parked in front of Jetline's regional office. A banner crawled across the TV screen inside the apartment. Whistleblower's daughter speaks out. FAA opens full inquiry into corporate practices. And below that, a subsection in gold font. Ellie Carson, 17, forces aviation industry to confront its past. It didn't feel real. Not just the headlines. The silence that came after. For weeks, the noise had been loud. Interviews, requests, emails, people recognizing her in the park. But then the noise thinned. Not because the impact was over, but because the truth had settled. It was no longer a flash. It was a fact. Ellie walked back inside just as Victoria stepped out of her room, still in slippers, her hair in a loose braid. "You're up early," her mom said. Ellie shrugged. "Didn't sleep much." They stood in the kitchen for a moment, quiet, but not awkward. Just "I keep thinking about that folder," Ellie finally said. "About how long it sat there, about how you almost threw it away." Victoria leaned against the counter, holding her own mug. "I did throw it away once," she said softly. "I took it to the dumpster, but I couldn't do it. Something stopped me." Ellie looked at her. "What?" Her mother smiled, faint and tired. Later that morning, Ellie opened the drawer in her bedroom where she'd stashed everything from the last 2 months. The press passes, the notebooks, the envelope from Jonas, and the printed-out photo of her mom in that white lab coat. On top of the pile was the note she had once received, anonymously. "They watched you stand, and this time, they couldn't look away." She thought about that a lot lately. Not just the standing, her watching. How many people had been in that cabin and said nothing? How many times had that happened to someone else and no one ever found out? Ellie wasn't naive. She knew her story wasn't the last, but she had made sure it wouldn't be the first to vanish. That afternoon, a letter arrived by courier. No return address, no sender name. Just a crisp envelope with her full name typed on the front. Inside was a simple invitation. A private roundtable hosted by the FAA. A working group to redesign passenger boarding protocols, with Ellie listed as a community stakeholder. She almost laughed. Just a few weeks ago, she couldn't even get through a gate without being questioned. And now they wanted her input. She tucked the letter into her journal, not because it was an honor, but because it was a shift. The kind you mark down so you never forget. As the sun lowered again that day, Ellie and Victoria drove to a quiet overlook just past the river bridge, one they used to visit when Ellie was little and sad about school or feeling small. They parked and sat on the hood of the car, watching the skyline in silence. Victoria finally broke it. "You know, I always thought I'd protect you by staying quiet," she said. "By shielding you from what they did to me." Ellie looked over. "You did protect me." Her mother shook her head. "You carried what I couldn't." "That's not fair." "And it's not about fair," Ellie replied. "It's about what matters." Victoria's voice caught in her throat. "You weren't supposed to be the one to finish this," she whispered. Ellie reached for her hand. "Maybe not," she said softly. "But I was ready." That night, Ellie sat down at her desk with a blank sheet of paper and began writing. Not a speech, not an op-ed, a letter to the girl who would sit in seat 3C 5 years from now, 10 years from now, the one who might look different, sound different, walk differently, but would still be told she didn't belong. She wrote, When they doubt your place, stay where you are. When they try to shrink you, stand taller. And when no one speaks for you, let your silence remind them you're watching. They won't always apologize, but they'll remember you. And maybe that's how the next girl doesn't have to be brave just to be seen. She folded the letter and slipped it into the back of her journal. Someday she'd pass it on, like the folder, like the truth, like the legacy her mother never meant to hand down, but now had been rewritten. Epilogue, a message to viewers. If you've made it this far, thank you. Thank you for believing that one voice still matters, that's standing up, even when you're scared, even when they tell you to sit down, is worth it. Ellie didn't need to scream. She didn't need to fight with fists or fire. She stood, and the world moved around her. If you've ever been told you don't belong, if you've ever been looked at like a problem before you even opened your mouth, if you've ever watched someone you love be questioned, dismissed, or belittled in front of a room that pretended not to see, let Ellie's story remind you. You are not alone. And more importantly, you are not powerless. So comment below. Have you ever been made to feel invisible in a place you had every right to be? Like if you believe in calm, powerful resistance. Hit subscribe for more stories that prove sometimes the quietest girl in the room is the one rewriting the ending. Thank you for flying with us, and may your skies always be clear. That night, after all the cameras had turned off and the inbox slowed down to a crawl, Ellie found herself standing in her childhood bedroom, where nothing had changed except her. On the edge of her old dresser sat a photo from when she was about 8. She was in a red hoodie, smiling next to her mom at a science museum. She didn't remember the photo being taken, but she did remember the night after. She had asked her mom, very directly, "Why don't you go to work anymore?" Victoria had looked up from the sink, hands wet, eyes tired. Then she said, "Sometimes the truth takes time." That was all. No explanation, no lecture, just those 5 words. At the time, Ellie thought her mom meant it takes time to explain. But now she knew. The truth itself needed time. Time to be believed. Time to be heard. Time to be safe enough to finally be spoken. 1 week later, Ellie received a message request on social media from a name she didn't recognize at first. Nadine Fletcher. It simply read, "If you're open to it, I'd like to apologize, not publicly, just woman to woman, over coffee." Ellie almost ignored it. Almost. But something in the phrasing, just woman to woman, hit different. So she said yes. They met at a quiet cafe near the marina. Nadine looked different. No uniform, no sleek bun, just tired eyes and a plain gray sweater. They sat down. Nadine spoke first. "I lost my job," she said quietly. "I know I deserved that." Ellie didn't reply. "I'm not here for sympathy," Nadine added. "But I've been thinking about what I said to you that day, about how fast I assumed you were a problem." Her voice cracked slightly. "I want to know. Weren't you scared back then, when you didn't leave the seat?" Ellie looked at her evenly. "I was terrified," she said. "But I was more afraid of becoming the kind of woman who looks away when someone else is." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Nadine whispered, "I think I already did become her." Ellie nodded once, not in agreement, but in understanding. "I used to think silence was protection," she said. "Turns out, it's just a quieter form of complicity." Nadine exhaled. "Thank you for letting me say that." Ellie stood to leave. "Thank you for not expecting me to say it back." That weekend, Ellie finally opened her email inbox. The top 200 messages were from strangers. One was from a retired flight engineer in Florida, another from a student studying law in Texas. But one stood out most. I'm 74 now. In 1991, I was kicked out of a first-class seat because the gate agent didn't think a black nurse from Alabama had paid for it. I've waited 33 years for someone like you. Thank you for showing up. Another message read, I'm a junior software engineer. I was going to pull my name from a harassment report I filed at my firm. But because of your story, I kept it in. I thought you should know, you gave someone else courage. A third message came from a nonprofit board. We're launching a STEM scholarship in your mother's name for young women of color entering aviation or data science. The Evelyn Carson Fellowship will open next spring. Ellie read each message slowly, not to relive the spotlight, but to remember the ripple. She closed her laptop and looked out the window. The sky had changed again, deep purple now, with streaks of orange at the edge. It wasn't a dramatic sky, but it was open, and maybe that's what mattered.